The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. This is Tracy Zimmerman with the North Carolina Early Childhood Foundation. Very excited to share with you today the results of our latest poll on North Carolina voters on early learning. It's who knew it would be such excellent timing with both presidential candidates focusing on childcare this past week. So we're excited to share the results with you. We are very honored to be partnering for the second time with the First 5 Years Fund to be able to do a poll of this nature. They have one that they just completed in the past couple of months nationally, which is available on their website. And then they have worked with us in North Carolina to get a sense of what North Carolina voters are having to say about early learning. The webinar is being recorded, so you will be able to share it with folks after today's session. And if you have questions, which we hope you will, you can type those in the questions box and we will be posing them to the pollsters at the end. So before we delve right into the findings, I wanted to make sure you knew that we have several tools available for folks to share the news on their websites with their networks in the news and with community leaders. And so if you go to the site that is listed at the bottom of the page, you will find that you will have access to the presentation that is being shared today, a series of infographics. These are just a few of them, but there are more on the site. There's information about email and social media postings, which we hope you will all do. There's a press release, a fact sheet, and a template that you can encourage your early learning champions across the state to use as a letter to the editor. So there are several tools available to share the pretty amazing findings that are in the poll that we'll be sharing with you today. We are incredibly lucky to be able to partner with this amazing, heavy-hitting, for sure, team of pollsters. Lori Weigel is with Public Opinion Strategies, and she has worked in the past, not currently, but in the past on behalf of several presidential campaigns and has done a tremendous amount of polling work in early learning and in North Carolina. So both Jay and Lori worked with us in 2014 on a similar poll we did, so they know the state and the issue well. Jay is with Heart Research and conducts research in all of the major areas that Heart Research focuses on, including political, nonprofit advocacy, media, corporate, and labor. And he, for a decade, managed Heart Research's regular polling for NBC News and the Wall Street Journal. So you can see we are in the hands of amazing experts who are now going to lead us through what the 2016 poll had to say, how the information was gathered, and so forth. So remember, use the questions the questions box if you have questions you'd like to ask at the end of the pollsters. And with that, Lori, I will turn it over to you, and I will do my best to intuit when you would like me to forward the slides. And if I miss, you'll just tell me.
Okay, thank you, Tracy. Thanks so much, everyone. So I'm still seeing the, if you want to move to the survey findings on the screen, Tracy. So let me tell you a little bit about what we did.
Are you seeing the methodology?
Yeah, I'm not seeing that. Anyone else?
No, I still see the intro slide.
Yeah.
Okay, if someone
you can talk about that while you pull that up if you want.
So for those who are on the webinar, if someone could type in the chat, because you're all on mute, and let me know what you're seeing. You should be seeing a slide that says methodology. Not advanced. No. Okay. All
Oh,
right.
it worked so well yesterday. All right. Well, let me talk through the methodology while you work on getting that pulled up.
Okay.
Okay. So we did a statewide survey of 500 voters throughout the state of North Carolina. Perfect. Now I can see it. Those were interviews that were phone interviews, but conducted on both landline and cell phones in order to ensure that we had the opportunity for many different people to participate in this survey. We drew the sample from voter files, so we know that those, and confirmed that those individuals are in the state. We know where they are in the state, so we set quotas by key demographics and by geography in order to ensure that we really had a representative sample throughout the state of North Carolina. Those interviews were conducted towards the end of July, and of course, as with any survey, there is a margin of error. Overall, it's less than 4.5%. Of course, some of the subgroups will mention the margin of error would be higher for those individual subgroups. And the reason that there's two of us is because when my firm polls in candidate campaigns, we poll for Republican candidates. Conversely, Jay's firm polls for Democratic candidates. But together, we have worked on early childhood education issues, and our firms partner on the NBC Wall Street Journal poll and many other public policy issues around the country. So we're delighted to be working together again on this, and we'll reference back to some of the other the national survey that was conducted, as well as surveys in some other key swing states. Much like North Carolina, we interviewed voters in Florida, in Ohio, and in my home state of Colorado. So let's look at what North Carolinians thought about this issue. So on the next slide, one of the core questions that we asked was to just get a sense of how voters were feeling about budgets and thinking about government spending in their state. And so we asked them to choose between two opposing positions. One would be that we should place a greater priority on ensuring sufficient funding for needs such as education, the other being that we ought to hold the line on taxes and spending in our state. And you can see we've got about 3 in 5 voters opting for the greater priority being on making sure there's sufficient funding for those various needs. We had just about a third saying hold the line on taxes and spending. So again, that was a dynamic that we saw both nationally and in some of these other key states, that voters are really, to a greater extent today, focused on ensuring that these various needs, especially things like education and schools where they recognize the need, is something that ought to have adequate funding. As well, we asked a broad question, asking respondents to tell us, think about some different goals for the country. And of course, they were randomized, so every person heard these in a somewhat different order. We placed them in rank order here by how they responded, because they were asked to tell us, is that something that is extremely, very, somewhat, or simply not that important to you personally as a goal for our country? What's striking here is that early childhood education, while we're now suddenly getting presidential candidates talking about it, in the past it really has been somewhat ignored a little bit in light of all these other issues, things like good paying jobs or controlling the cost of health care or even K through 12 education. But you can see voters in the state are telling us that early childhood education really belongs up there with all those very important issues. And in fact, if you contrast it with one issue that was talked about a lot during the presidential primaries, which was the idea of providing low or no cost college education to students here in this country, it vastly eclipses that. Only 50% of North Carolinians said that they thought that was an important goal for the country. And even things like immigration, it just, 20 points higher than that particular issue. So they are placing a high priority on that. Part of that, we think, is because voters are telling us that they really understand that those early childhood years are the most important time for developing a child's capacity to learn. you can see we asked them to tell us among these various spectrums of age groups here, what was the most important age, and we've collapsed the birth to 5 years so you can see just how often respondents were choosing one of these categories. In fact, a majority were placing it in sort of the preschool years, but overall birth to 5 was 79% of the voters said that that was the most important age for developing a child's capacity to learn. I think that's something that we've seen just anecdotally in some other research as a growing recognition among voters that this is important due to all the brain science and research that's taken place in this arena. Moreover, we have seen that voters really recognize and feel like there is a need in their area. So when we asked respondents to tell us not just the state, but how many of the early education programs in your area would you say are high quality and affordable for lower and middle income families, you can just see the striking results. And certainly it's some just saying, I'm not really sure. It's about 1 in 5 respondents. But for the most part, many were telling us it was half or fewer, 2/3, 66% saying that they recognized this sort of need. It was only 15% that felt like things in their area were pretty under control in terms of having those options for high quality and affordable programs. And that really didn't vary where we were in the state in terms of talking to respondents. In every single one, you can see those responses are really within the margin of error in terms of the half or fewer programs being something that those high quality and affordable programs just simply were not existing there. We had almost 2/3 in every single region. And on the next slide, it really didn't vary by income either. So it wasn't as if we had respondents in certain categories that are telling us that they felt like things were fine. In fact, it was our upper income households that were most likely to say that half or fewer were, would meet this goal, and only 1 in 10. So really, no matter where we were, no matter the type of person and their income that we were talking to, they were recognizing that there was this need for both high quality and affordable programs. So I think that's why we get the results that we do on the next slide. We saw, and this was a question we tracked using the exact wording that we did in 2014 to understand if there were any differences today. And I can tell you this was one of my big surprises, because a lot of times these are issues that people have thought about and considered before, and we don't just see this type of movement on every type of issue out there in terms of public policy. So in 2014, we had 65% indicating that in terms of preparing our children so that they have the skills and knowledge they need when they get to elementary school to do their best, that we ought to be doing more in that arena. Today it's 74%. And those saying that we're doing enough has dropped down to 18%. It's only 4% that really think we ought to be doing less. I'm not quite sure what they mean by that, but anyway. So that is a striking distinction over this time, and that, moreover, has come among many different types of subgroups. For example, one of the groups that really stands out, those independent voters that are so crucially important to deciding elections in North Carolina, they showed the biggest jump overall, 18-point increase in terms of feeling like we had to be doing more in this arena. Maybe that's why we are having presidential candidates talking about this issue today. As well, we see a solid majority of Republicans, 59%, indicating that we ought to be doing more on this. And I think importantly, this is not an issue that it's just parents that are thinking about it. Even those without children in their home right now, we have 3/4 of men without children at home and women without children at home that are telling us this is something that we ought to be doing more on. So this is not a quote-unquote mom issue. It is something that voters across the spectrum are really recognizing, and that we've seen a growing emphasis on taking action on this issue. Moreover, we see that North Carolinians are really telling us that they think that having more children that are able to attend high-quality early education programs would yield many different benefits. Not only in the short term, where children might be having academic success in elementary school, you can see 78% think it would help if more children were able to attend high-quality early education programs, but as well extending into those middle and high school years. And more importantly, I think we even see 3/4 of the voters telling us that they think this is going to have a really long-term economic impact in having a larger pool of highly skilled workers in the state. So a number of different benefits really being recognized there. And I think that's why we get some of the support levels that we do. While we had a significant jump in those saying that we ought to be doing more on this issue, what happens when we get more specific is we have even greater support. That's really unusual for a public policy issue. Lots of times people will just be saying, okay, yeah, I think something ought to be done about that, but when you get to specific proposals, that support can wither. We're seeing the exact opposite dynamic here. So we have almost 9 in 10 telling us whether it is making it more affordable, whether it is making sure it gets integrated better into some of these other services and everything's working together, telling us that they support that. Even voluntary home visiting and parent education programs, which tend to be something that fewer people are more familiar with, 4 and 5 indicate support for that. And that support is fairly intense. So it's not just sort of, an inch thick across the board there. It's something that's really deep in terms of support levels. We have more than 2/3, in fact, strongly supportive of making early education more affordable. It's almost 3 in 5 for that integration policy change, and nearly half for voluntary home visiting, which again is not something that often people is quite as familiar or well understood. And when we talked about specific programs in the state, the NC Pre-K and Smart Start on the next slide, this was a question that we tracked from 2 years ago. And just like we did on that generic feeling that we ought to be doing more, we saw a 10-point increase here in terms of people telling us that they were supportive of ensuring that we have expanded access to these 2 programs so that more children in the state can participate in them. Now, obviously, we know people are not like you all that are taking time out of a beautiful fall morning to focus on these issues. And so we gave a simple little explanation there. It was the exact same explanation that we gave 2 years ago. And again, we're seeing that overall support increase. We're seeing those being opposed go down by the same amount. And we're seeing a higher level of intensity today, where 63% are indicating support for that. That is something that has come, that increase in support has come with some very important groups. While Republican voters were fairly split 2 years ago, we see 7 in 10 Republicans indicating support today, 87% of independents, and the overwhelming majority of Democrats are in support of expanding access to these programs. As well, on the next slide, once again, we're seeing that this is not something that's just limited to parents, that we have those without children at home also telling us it's very important as well. And obviously our female voters are somewhat more likely to indicate support than our male voters, but overall this is not something that's just, again, limited to one spectrum of the electorate. And so that has some consequences in terms of people thinking about this issue and placing it in a somewhat political perspective. We asked respondents to tell us what kind of impact this would have on an impression of a candidate for elected office in the state, and would they have a more favorable, less favorable impression, or would it really make no difference in how they feel? I think the most important number on this slide is a very small one. It's at 5% in that first set of columns there that say they'd have a less favorable. And while we have a majority saying they'd be more favorable, and in fact 31% much more favorable impression, what this tells us is even if this is not something that's really a vote determinant for people, it's not going to be something that has a backlash. That doing this is something that where these candidates for elected office ought to feel comfortable supporting this type of issue. And I think really we're seeing that play out in the public sphere right now. And again, that positive impression not limited by parent status, and something where voters across the political spectrum are saying, well, at least it's benign, if not overwhelmingly positive. So just a couple other things that we looked at. One was digging into a proposal that we tested nationally as well, and that was asking about a federal investment into this sphere. We certainly, lots of times people can say, oh yeah, these things sound great, and sure we ought to be doing this stuff. What often, will plummet support is when you ask them, okay, well, let's actually put some dollar figures to that and see if people still support it. And so we gave them, you can see the middle sentence here, the plan will make available $10 billion per year for 10 years, so not inconsequential numbers here, in order to basically achieve some of these policy goals like providing greater access for all of these different types of programs. And when we did this, here in North Carolina, we saw that we still had nearly 3/4 of the voters, 74% indicating support. We had half strongly in support, and fewer than 1 in 4 telling us that they were opposed, even to this very consequential number here. This was on par with many of our other states in which we talked to people. In fact, North Carolina was one of the higher ones in terms of our swing states, in terms of being supportive of this type of federal investment. Moreover, the support extended across the partisan spectrum. We had a majority of Republicans, 3/4 of independent voters, and then, of course, a very strong support among Democrats. Moreover, if you look at this throughout the state, so it's not something limited to just one area. Every single, we looked at this by major media markets because they sort of break the state nicely into various regions, but we had strong support throughout the entire state of North Carolina. And I think why we're hearing some of the campaigns now talking about this issue is because some of those very important swing voter groups are telling us that they're even more supportive. Even when we're placing this very significant price tag on it, we had solid support among sort of our younger independents, our younger female voters, those moderate voters in the middle of the ideological spectrum, and of course our mom vote. Our mom vote tends to almost decide the outcome of many of these elections. Everybody's heard them talk about the importance of like suburban women, for example. It's really our moms that end up deciding the outcomes of lots of elections here in North Carolina. Moreover, looking ahead to having a new Congress and a new president, voters are saying, okay, not only do we want something to be done on this and we're supportive of putting dollars behind it, but we really think even if these, if we end up having folks from different political parties here, we want the next president and Congress to work together to make some difference and improve access to quality early childhood education. That's about as overwhelming as you get, 90% with 80% feeling that they strongly should work together on this particular issue. And this doesn't happen on other issues. Sometimes there's much more division in terms of what should be done. So really that wraps up our key findings from this survey. I think, we've hit on all of this, but just to reinforce, first of all, I think we're seeing just really phenomenal numbers, an increase in terms of desire to take action and do more, an increase in terms of people saying that that this is important and telling us this is a top-tier goal for the state. They are saying that that this children having access to early childhood education has many benefits, even very long-term benefits of having more skilled workers in the state. They feel there is a need, and they view these early years as the most important in terms of laying a groundwork for success for these children. So I think with all of that, that's why we're seeing these very almost stunningly positive results in terms of voter support for specific policies, as well as for backing that up with a federal investment.
Thank you.
So I went through that quickly. I don't know if Jay had anything to reinforce or add from my comments.
As usual, Lori was very thorough in going through the data. The only thing I would sort of underscore is something you, Lori, said and Tracy sort of led with, which is it's just been interesting to see. This is the second time we've polled in North Carolina for Tracy and for the First 5 Years Fund, but it's the fourth time that Lori and I have worked together for the First 5 Years Fund on a national basis. And one thing that we've seen all along over the last 4 years is that it's fairly consistently been the case that there's been support for investments in early education across the partisan spectrum. I mean, we will admit, yes, it is higher among Democrats and among independents than it is among Democrats and independents than it is among Republicans. But as Lori pointed out just a couple of slides ago, still a majority of Republicans are in favor, say that they're in favor of a $10 billion a year investment in this area. And I think that it's been the timeliness here of releasing this data at the same time that the Republican nominee for the presidency has placed a greater focus on early education is really interesting. And it's in some ways perhaps a signal that the parties have caught up to where the public already have been over the past several years, that this is an important priority and that it is deserving of public investment. I mean, we've always said for years now that, you know, those on the right generally do not support public involvement or government involvement with people's lives, except in areas that people cannot take care of themselves. That's why, you know, part of the reason why conservatives have always been in favor of defense, of national security. It's something that we as American public cannot take care of ourselves. But I think that there's perhaps a greater recognition now over time, given the extraordinary costs of childcare and early education, that this is veering into an area that people cannot do entirely on their own and that they do need help. And the fact that Donald Trump's campaign and Donald Trump himself have recognized that fact sort of takes a lot of the sting out of what has traditionally been some reticence to support this issue because of the massive investments that are required and involved with it. But I think the timing is excellent, and I think that the data is very consistent with where both of these campaigns for president are at this point.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you so much to Lori and Jay. So just as a reminder, if you have questions, you can type them in the question box. I'm going to take a minute while I give you all a moment to do that to go back to 2 slides. As I understand, they were not showing previously. And this is the slide that gives you the web address of where all the various tools are that we've developed for you to be able to share the findings. So that is at the bottom, and is what you'll also be getting an email about following the webinar. And this is showing you the types of tools that are there. Again, this presentation will be accessible, a series of infographics, fact sheet, press release, social media postings, and a letter to the editor template. Okay, I do see one question so far, which is, what is the distribution plan for getting these polling results to state and federal policymakers? So I can respond to that one. We have shared, well, first we shared the webinar with every candidate that is running for the General Assembly and for the state Senate and for the governor's office. So we did do that. We have also reached out to candidates to share the findings with them directly, and we will be sharing the press release today, again, with all of those who are running for office. However, I think that the best way to get this information into the hands of state policymakers is really for those of you in your communities to be reaching out and asking these questions of them and sharing the information with them. Many of them are hard at work campaigning right now and making sure that all candidates are both aware of the level of support within North Carolina for these issues and the fact that voters want more action really places, I think, one might say, a mandate on candidates to speak to what is their early learning plan, and that's a question all of us can ask. Okay, someone is saying, I will pass that along to the first 5 years folks, that there's trouble getting onto the site. Okay, thanks for the heads up. hopefully you'll be able to access the tools on ours. Again, it's buildthefoundation.org, and there is a link from the homepage. Are there any other questions about the findings for Lori and Jay while we have them accessible to us? I'm just going to give folks another minute. Well, it's looking like, Lori, you were so incredibly thorough in your explanation. I'm not seeing a lot of questions here.
So
here's one.
we'd be happy to answer them. If they come to people later, you can always forward those along. So.
Okay, I have one more, which is wanting to know a little bit more about how North Carolina compares to the other states where you've done the polling this year.
That's a great question. So as we mentioned, we looked at Colorado, Florida, North Carolina, and Ohio. We saw quite a bit of consistency in the questions that we asked throughout those states. For example, we saw in all of those places that respondents were recognizing this need, and that they were very much recognizing that birth through age 5 was sort of the most important age for developing a child's capacity to learn. Although I would say North Carolinians had the highest recognition of that. They were at 79%. Most others were more around the 70% mark. So modest distinction, but still you guys can pat yourselves on the back for making sure that voters know about that importance there. We did see that in terms of this increase in the perception that as a state we ought to be doing more in the early childhood education arena, that all 4 of those states had shown some at least modest uptick in that. And North Carolina and Florida were most likely to say that we ought to be doing more. Florida was at 75%. Again, North Carolina was at 74%. So that was again significant. All of the others were fairly strong as well. And then in terms of that federal investment, North Carolina and Ohio were the 2 highest in terms of the response there, just slightly above Florida and a little bit above my home state of Colorado. So you guys are really leading, I think. Modest distinctions, of course, but again, ought to be proud in terms of where North Carolina stands in relation to those other states that are garnering this attention during the presidential campaigns.
And I would point out, I've pulled up this slide, which I know I've had some conversation with you all, Lori and Jay, about in the past. I think this slide is particularly important as well in North Carolina in showing that voters understand the connection of early learning to both short and long-term goals, particularly around 3rd grade reading, which we're all very focused on, but also long-term of having a larger pool of highly skilled workers. And so that's something to take note of, that the work in helping people understand the impact of early learning, there's definitely clear connections there that people have. So I am not seeing any other questions, although I am seeing some comments. So I'll pass them on to you, Lori and Jay, that just says great info and great job. And we hope that you all will be sharing it. Someone asked if I'll be sending the PowerPoint out. Again, it is on our website, and you should be able to readily access it there, buildthefoundation.org. If you have any trouble accessing it, just shoot me an email, and I will make sure you can get it. All right. Well, thank you so much, Lori and Jay. I look forward to partnering with you all again in the future, and we will do our best here to have those numbers go even higher in North Carolina.
Thank you, Tracy. Thank you all very much.
Thank
you.